Hello and good afternoon, 8th grade class. It's your teacher, Mr. Wollens. Hope you guys are all doing well as we're nearing the end of the quarantine period officially. And we are also nearing the end of the school year. And it's very, very unfortunate that I will not be able to properly send you guys off into the summer. But nonetheless, it's going to be a fun year when we come back. I know I'm definitely coming back. Nobody's ever told me no, you're not coming back, and I'm definitely not making the decision not to come back. I miss you guys very much, and I want to be able to see all of your smiling faces when we come back in August. And for those of you that are moving on to other places, other schools, other educational opportunities, by all means, enjoy it while you can. Enjoy it, run with it, and make the best of it. Because these 4 years will absolutely fly by faster than you could ever expect them to. But enough about me getting on my little soapbox. That's me. This is me stepping off the soapbox and going back to what we've been talking about, which is the Civil War. Now, we were gonna talk about that ideally when we were back in class towards the end of us playing those iCivics games. But I'd like to think that the resources that I've given you guys have done at least a well enough done job for that at this point. But before we get to what we're going to today, I think it'd be a good idea to review some important, I guess, if you were to consider it as a story or as a novel, some plot points of the Civil War. The first one is that everybody knows this one at this point, but it's the North versus the South, and the main issue is about slavery. But if you were to take slavery out of the equation, you realize that, especially for President Abraham Lincoln, once the war actually kicks off, because the war kicks off sort of, depending on how you want to look at it, right when Abraham Lincoln is elected into office, because Southern voters in Southern states are seeing him and are concerned that he's going to be the guy that's going to make it impossible for slavery to continue. But Lincoln's able to see the bigger picture. Like, if the North and the South are inside of this circle, the bigger picture is what Abraham Lincoln sees. And that's, quote, what he considered preserving the Union. Not the North, the Union, but the entire country as a whole. So if you were to take slavery out of the equation, it's trying to keep the country together for either A, social reasons, or B, economic reasons. Because if you remember from what we were talking about with that little article that I gave you guys and that chart that you had to fill out, the North and the South were going along very different economic strands. The North was in the midst of industry. They were building factories, eventually building taller buildings, full mass production style cities were coming into effect. And that would be more seen in the next 20 or 30 years in the Industrial Revolution in the United States, where steam trains and then eventually electricity and all sorts of mechanical and technological advancements that today we would take for granted are coming about. But in the South, it's the same thing we've been talking about since the beginning of the year in terms of the crops that they're producing and the type of work that's being done, which is mainly agriculture, and that agriculture is obviously built off of slave labor. But that agriculture is mainly cash crops, so tobacco, and then eventually, as the country is moving out west, where we have new states like Tennessee, Missouri, Texas, and California, there's going to be more crops that are being made that are these raw materials that are going to be used in the factories in the North. So, in addition to the issue of slavery, you have the chance of two separate economies being formed if there's two countries on one giant continent between the Union and the Confederacy. Because the Union, they're not going to be able to produce as much goods anymore because all their raw material, ideally, and anything that they're getting from the South is either going to be charged at higher prices or the taxes and tariffs that are going to be put on them are going to be put higher and are going to be impossible for them to pay. And then the South, they're going to have to play catch up with the North as far as industry is concerned. They're going to have to build factories. They're going to have to find ways to put people in them, which would obviously be slave population. But that's just one other sort of side argument if you talk about that. So as the years leading up to Lincoln's election, it's becoming more and more clear that the issue of slavery in the states and where it's going to be spread out as far as just the 13 colonies and then the Northwest Territory and then any new states that are going to be added to the Union. That's the biggest issue that the government at this time is trying to figure out is, does slavery want to be pushed forward, or should we leave it up to the states to decide, or should we as the general public, or not the general public, the United States government decide on whether a state is going to be free or a slave or not. And that was something that Lincoln, again, big picture guy, saw out and tried to make it apparent in the years leading up to the secession of South Carolina and his election, was that he did not want to completely end slavery at first. Before the war even began, all that Lincoln wanted to do was just stop slavery from going further and further west. But as the war would continue, it's clearly not going to be the case. And he's going to make the stance of slavery not only needs to end, but that is the main issue of the Civil War. So much so that one of the bloodiest battles of the war, Gettysburg, is going to be something that he wants to make people remember. It's like, if there's any one act or any one event of the entire Civil War, it's going to be the events that happened in July of 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg. So much so that he delivered a short little speech that was spoken about on November 19th, 1863. So this was months after the battle had gone on, ended, and the war was still going on at this point in time. It would be about another year and a half or so before the actual Civil War was to come to an end. But with the Battle of Gettysburg ending, Lincoln's speech, what he wanted to do is commemorate and make it known that the events that happened on this battlefield were not in vain, that they were just a waste of time. So I got the speech right in my hands for you, or a copy of it, and I'm going to read it to you guys real quick. And then when I'm done reading that, we'll get into some of the other defining battles of the Civil War, and that will lead you into what your assignment is going to be for the week. So, President Lincoln, this short 272-word address on November 19th, 1863, on the battlefield near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now, some of the language and some of the terminology, the words that he uses in this speech are words and phrases that are rarely used in this point in time. So I will attempt to translate them as best as I can from resources that I've seen and from the collected history from it. So, the infamous beginning of the speech. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So what he's talking about, So what he's talking about at this point in time is he's referring way back to the country was first founded, when the Pilgrims came, when eventually the War Revolution happened, and the United States was formed. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. He's obviously talking about Gettysburg. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a large sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. So when we're remembering it, we can't he's basically saying while people are trying to remember what happened at the Battle of Gettysburg, we can't disregard any information as to what happened. We can't turn this into a parking structure, or in that case, it'd probably just be like a random development place where people can start living. Can't do that. Takes away the meaning and the purpose and the metaphorical resemblance of the battlefield altogether. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause, for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Pretty good example of foreshadowing. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. So again, Lincoln, Gettysburg Address summed up. He's bringing to note of how almost 100 years ago, there were people that wanted to form a new nation. And it was built on that principle that all men are created equal, which is basically in the first few lines of the Declaration of Independence. And then what happens after that? Not even 100 years later, Civil War breaks out. And in writing this speech, saying what he's saying, it's clear Lincoln doesn't want to see what happens at Gettysburg nor in the rest of the entire conflict wasted. He doesn't want the battle. He doesn't want the entire war to be fought without a purpose. And he doesn't want the memory of Gettysburg to be expelled. He doesn't want the memory to be abolished whatsoever. And he also, again, being a bigger picture guy, does not want to see the country fall apart because of what's been happening. He's hoping that after the entire Civil War, after the battle, after the fighting, that there's time to put the country back together. But time is what it's actually going to take. So, what I have for you guys now, and this will be some of the work that you're doing for this week, is a Newselaw article called Defining Battles of the Civil War. Now, there's scores of conflict and there's scores of fighting that happened, which means that there's a lot of different battles that occur in the Civil War. But these are just some of the big ones that people who study the conflict and have learned, for lack of a better term, anything to do with the Civil War. These are some of the big battles that you would talk about and you would hear about no matter what. And one thing to note is that, and when you guys get a copy of this article, one of the first few things that it will say is the bloodiest war in American history. Keep that in mind when they say American history, because this graph, this is from the American Battlefield Trust, which is a site that's dedicated to preserving the memory and containing as much information on the Civil War and any war that the United States is involved in. And this graph shows basically American casualties between different wars that were fought, from the most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan all the way up to World War II. And it goes up. You've got the Spanish-American War, which we'll learn about next year. You've got the Mexican War. You've got the War of 1812, American Revolution, Korea, Vietnam, World Wars I and II, and then the Civil War. And that's just purely with American casualties. World War I and II, while it had the United States involved, wasn't fought on our country, was not fought on our home soil. Of course, there was the attack on Pearl Harbor, but that wasn't an actual fight. That was just an action by Japan, and we were retaliating, and we were trying to defend ourselves. So when they say it's the bloodiest battle in American history, they're just talking about American history. Bloodiest war, not battle. Bloodiest war of all time is World War II. You're amounting all the casualties. But in American history, you're just talking about America, it's the Civil War. So the battles that this article covers are the first Battle of Bull Run, Battle of Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg. And since I just read the Gettysburg Address, what I'll do is I will read the Gettysburg section, and then what you guys are going to do when I'm done reading, when you're done watching this video, is you will complete your guided questions that you get sent home to you, and you will get a version of this article sent home to you, and it'll basically be a version that doesn't have so much information on it, so I don't overwhelm you guys, or so I don't bring up anything, or so there's nothing really missed out with this entire thing. So, the Battle of Gettysburg. And this would be after the Battle of Antietam. Although Antietam was a setback to General Lee's plans, the Union failed to take advantage of the situation. Lincoln replaced General McClellan, but his new generals lost decisively at Fredericksburg, Virginia, and Chancellorsville, Virginia. These Confederate victories encouraged Lee to renew his plan to invade the North. Lee moved the Army of Northern Virginia north. Almost sounds like a conundrum. Stumbled upon my words. And the new Union general, George Meade, shadowed him to protect Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., all major cities for the North, especially Washington. The forces met at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on the morning of July 1st. But despite early successes, the Confederate forces were not able to drive the Union Army off the heights. The following day, as reinforcements arrived for both sides, Lee again failed to defeat the Union Army. July 3rd saw one last push from the Confederates. Lee ordered what has become known as Pickett's Charge, which was an assault of some 15,000 Confederate troops, up Cemetery Ridge. Although the charge broke through Union lines, the Confederates were unable to hold onto their gains and retreated. Lee prepared for the counterattack he expected the next day, but it never came. He withdrew his forces on July 4th, and the Union Army did not pursue. While Meade won the battle and stopped the invasion, he failed to destroy Lee's army and put an end to the rebellion. Union casualties numbered around 23,000, while Confederate casualties numbered around 28,000. And hands down, the Battle of Gettysburg alone, combining North and South, Union, Confederate, however you'd like to define them, would be, hands down, the largest number of casualties in the Civil War. Alrighty, guys, so that's going to do it for me. That's a quick little Civil War recap and preview for you guys. Be sure that you're looking at the right sections from this article. So you're looking at the right questions as well, and you're doing the right questions that are assigned to you. Other than that, stay safe, stay healthy, keep in contact with those close to you. Hopefully this quarantine will be done soon so you guys can get out of your houses, get some well-deserved exercise in the sun. Currently it's raining out right now, so might not be a good time to do that today. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will hope to see you guys next year. Bye-bye.